I'm Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. Coronavirus restrictions are still ongoing in Washington state, and that is at the same time that the state legislature is about to begin. And here to discuss all of those dynamics happening at once is Olympia correspondent Austin Jenkins. Thanks for joining us today, Austin.
Good to be back, Scott.
So the state legislature is convening on Monday, January 11th. We will get to that. But first, Governor Jay Inslee recently unveiled a new way of evaluating the reopening plan, and it's going to be more of a regional plan rather than county by county. This, of course, after things have been closed down, restaurants, indoor dining closed, bowling alleys closed since November, and now we're looking for a restart in some ways. But what is this new plan? A new way of evaluating reopening? What does that look like?
Right. So rather than looking county by county, they're looking region by region, with the idea of hospital services being the organizing principle behind those regions. So regions that share medical services. And a big part of the metrics that they're going to be using to decide if regions can move into phase 2 and start to allow some indoor dining again, for instance, will be if, for instance, the ICU bed capacity is not too taxed, making sure that positive COVID rates are on the decline, not on the increase. So it is a new approach. It's also a fairly slow approach because the reality is there's just 2 phases. We're in phase 1, essentially, or will soon be. Phase 2 allows for 25% capacity in restaurants. So it's not a full reopening at this point. And there's a lot of factors that could have regions going from phase 2 back to phase 1 if they start to slip. And of course, there's the concern about this mutated version of COVID-19 that is more communicable, more contagious. And if that shows up in Washington, that could scramble all of these best laid plans.
Governor Inslee previously in the fall talked about this idea that the cavalry is on the way. We just need to keep people alive until it gets here. Of course, he was referring to the vaccine being the cavalry there. But with this new reopening plan, does that take into account the number of people who have been or will be vaccinated and say, okay, well, it's a little safer now, we can have more reopening? Is that part of the criteria?
Vaccinations are not one of the 4 metrics they're using. It is something they will be considering and watching, to be clear. But the reality is we, like much of the country, are really lagging right now in terms of getting these vaccinations into people's arms. They're arriving, they're here, but getting them administered has been a hurdle. And so separate from, but also related to, clearly interrelated to this reopening, is the need to figure out infrastructure that will allow for a faster administering of these vaccines, because clearly the infrastructure that's in place right now isn't getting the job done. That's causing frustration. Now, the governor has pointed to some hospital systems that seem to be hitting higher marks than the overall statewide effort. Just before the beginning of the year, we were seeing the state at 19% delivery of these or administration of these vaccines. So only 19% of the vaccines the state had received had actually been administered just before the beginning of the new year. That's highly concerning, obviously, to a lot of people.
Moving on to the start of the Washington State legislative session, of course, a lot has gone on since they dismissed in their last session in March 2020. But first, we saw on Wednesday, January 6th, what happened at the U.S. Capitol with all of the people streaming in there, protesting the election, disrupting it, and many things that we have never really seen before, at least in modern history. What, if anything, might the state capitol be doing to prepare for potential disruptions or protests or whatever you might call it ahead of the session beginning on January 11th?
Yeah, everybody's on high alert, and there's a lot of concern about something similar happening in Olympia. We've already seen groups promising to show up at the Capitol to try to gain entrance to the Capitol building on the first day. The building will be closed to the public. However, lawmakers need to meet in person to approve the rules that are then going to allow them to mostly meet remotely. So it's sort of this irony. They have to show up in person in order to agree not to meet in person. So you've got groups far-right groups that are saying they're going to try to slip through the doors, get into the Capitol, occupy the public galleries above the House and Senate chambers if they can. A lot of security planning going into this first day. State Patrol very much on heightened alert. Clearly, they do not want a repeat of what happened at the U.S. Capitol.
So as to the actual substance of the legislative session, not just the security measures around it, you recently wrote about sort of 5 things to watch as we come into the session. What are those 5 things? What are you looking out for as major themes for these next several months?
Well, certainly the protests are something to watch. I mean, we are in very, very polarized times. There is very high tension. Politically, certainly the virus, the pandemic has become politicized. The governor's shutdown orders have become very political with some restaurant owners and other business owners acting in defiance of those, and then supporters coming to rally behind them. So things feel very combustible, very tense, and this is unprecedented to have the legislature trying to meet and legislate remotely. The House plans to be almost entirely remote. The Senate looking at more of a hybrid approach. So just the mechanics of this session is going to be really interesting, along with that heightened protest, polarized environment. It's important to be paying attention to the big issues that majority Democrats are talking about tackling. Right away, they're looking at some sort of COVID relief measure to augment what the governor has already done with federal funds, $100 million fund grants for restaurants and other hard-hit businesses. He's asking legislators to approve another $100 million. They may also be deciding how the next round of federal stimulus or relief dollars is spent. So that could happen in January. Then, of course, police reform is a very hot topic. A lot of bills already pre-filed and ready to go on that topic, including banning chokeholds, creating some sort of independent investigative office for allegations of police excessive force. The governor's top issue, longtime top issue, is climate change, and he's going to be pushing hard for a climate agenda, including trying again for a low carbon fuel standard, or clean fuel standard, he calls it. They tried previously, haven't gotten that passed. And then, of course, this is a budget writing year, 2-year budget writing a 2-year budget. Democrats are talking about a capital gains tax again, so we'll be watching for that to be sure.
You have previously talked, Austin, about this 80-20 proposition in the state legislature, and I'm sure it expands to most every state legislature, that about 80% of the business is actually pretty bipartisan, and there's not a lot of controversy in those sorts of bills. It's that 20% of things that you really start to see the ideological differences between the parties. And I think we can conceptually figure out what those differences are, that 20% range. What are some of those 80% areas where there's a lot of support, not much opposition, where you see this bipartisan working? What are some of those topics?
Well, and just I'll note that because of the remote nature of this session, the volume of bills that actually make it through the entire sausage making process may be reduced considerably. I've heard some say it could be half or even a third of what normally gets through. We'll see. But yeah, it's true that a lot of what the legislature does is done in bipartisan, even unanimous fashion, and they kind of wind themselves around the axle on that 20%. What I think is unclear at this point is, on the one hand, Democrats have been signaling, especially House Democrats, telling their members, limit the number of bills you introduce, try to not introduce super partisan bills that are going to tie up a lot of time on the floor. Let's focus on some key areas like COVID relief and police reform and climate change, equity issues. So I can see it going one of 2 ways. They may try to leave some of the more controversial stuff for another day, another year, and maybe build some bipartisan coalitions. I could also see, though, that with Democrats having strong majorities in both chambers and the governor's office, and the fact that things are very polarized now, that this could in fact be a very partisan session. Republicans are frustrated that the governor didn't call them back into special session this year. So there's some built up animosity and tension even out of the gates here. So I'm not sure what we're going to see, but this is going to be a unique and different session on a lot of fronts. And the political dynamics really going to be interesting to watch those unfold.
It is said, as you noted before, that no one wants to see laws or sausages being made because it's too messy. But I wonder this year that might be especially true or different because of the likely remote nature of the session. And it's going to be a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of committee hearings that are done, online and remotely, and votes like that. There might not be a lot of people who want to, participate in that. But I wonder, maybe on the other side, that actually allows for more people to participate because they don't have to travel to Olympia to provide their testimony or, attend or watch in person. So what are some of those pros and cons that you think might happen from this sort of unique year, and whether lawmakers, the general public, and you in the press corps might be thinking about that? I know you won't be able to grab a lawmaker in the hall and get a quick quote, but other than that, what are some of those on each side of that issue?
Well, one reason for the protest is that those who are planning to show up at the Capitol are saying that closing the Capitol and not allowing the public in is unconstitutional. And I'm not aware of any legal test in the course of this yet, but that's the premise that they're working on. And it's true that instead of coming to Olympia, going to a committee hearing room and testifying for 3 minutes for a committee, now people will do that remotely. There is the possibility, and some open government advocates have said as much, that this could actually prove more inclusive and more and provide more opportunities for the public to engage. I mean, imagine if you are 6 hours away from Olympia, sitting where you are in Pullman or anywhere really east of the mountains in particular, where it's a long drive plus it's wintertime and you have to cross a pass, that the ability to testify from the comfort of your home could be very appealing and might make the legislature more accessible. But we also know that when there's a computer screen between two people, it is a barrier, and it's going to be very different. I mean, the lobbyists are going to have to learn new ways to do their work because they're not going to be able to grab people as reporters do in the hallway. So it's going to be very different. In some ways, it will be perhaps more accessible. In many ways, it will be less accessible.
Well, whatever happens, we know that you will be providing very good information about it. And we thank you for joining us today to talk about the 2021 legislative session. Thanks so much, Austin.
Thanks for having me, and you're welcome.
You can see more of Austin's reporting on these and other topics at nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.